spokespersons on the media this morning. I see the Health Secretary has made it to the Chamber. And that's the point, Mr. Speaker. This virus isn't defeated. We're going to face other tests where the British people may be asked by their leaders to make further sacrifices for the greater good. Her Majesty the Queen sat alone when she marked the passing of the man she'd been married to for 73 years. Leadership, sacrifice, that's...
Labour humiliated Labour MPs faces the worst humiliation since they took over power. Shadow Secretary, I'm sorry, she began, say hello, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A palpable sense of frustration, tinged with a touch of pity, emanated from her. I feel for the honourable gentleman, sent here today by his bosses to complete what must be the most humiliating climb down a government has ever faced in its first year in office. For nearly a year, the Conservatives have campaigned against this cut, and for nearly a year, they have tried to hold out. Just 4 weeks ago, I stood here and I asked him how long this tone-deaf final stand could go on for. Loyally, he held the line, he defended the cut one final time. He said their plan for pensioners was right on track. Well, today, Madam Deputy Speaker, he has been sent to end that courageous last stand and, unless it's coming next, he has been sent without the one thing that pensioners up and down the country deserve, an apology. A wave of applause rippled through the chamber. Let's be clear, she continued, her voice firm, the government made a choice to cut the winter fuel payment. It is outrageous to claim that the economy has somehow improved from the day they made the cut, and they know it. In fact, by almost every metric, the opposite is true. Inflation was at the 2% target, now it's 1.5 points higher. 150,000 more people are unemployed. Growth forecasts have been slashed in half by the OBR. And in the meantime, they've gone to town with the country's credit card. Borrowing is up, debt is up. Who is a chancellor trying to fool when she says she can suddenly afford this when before she couldn't? The fact is, last winter, she gave pensioners fuel money to the unions. Now she realizes how unpopular that was, so she's pretending everything has changed. Perhaps the most surprising thing is she thinks anyone is taken in. 50,000 pensioners plunged into poverty this year, according to their own analysis. 100,000 extra pensioners ended up in A&E this winter. Their mistake has hurt people, and it is cowardly not to own up to it. Just like the government's PIT reforms, there were no consultations, no proper assessments, just a self-righteous insistence that what they're doing should not be questioned. Certainly no thought for those actually affected or concern for the anxiety that their government by press release is causing. This is what happens when a government comes into office with no plan and no principles, no idea what they want to achieve and no idea how to achieve it. They just bumble from one mistake to another, breaking promise after promise. Do they think they could just try out new policies like you try a new mattress? Unwrap it, see how it feels, sleep on it for a while, but if it causes a political backache, send it back. This rushed reversal raises as many questions as it answers. It's clear that when the Prime Minister stood up and made his big U-turn announcement in PMQs, he had no plan and no idea how he was going to pay for it. It's a totally unfunded spending commitment. Where is the £1.25 billion needed to pay for this U-turn coming from? I note that the Minister has kicked that can down the road until the budget. They claim it won't permanently add to borrowing, so does this mean it will permanently add to taxation? And on the plan itself, is this really the best system of means testing they could come up with? Is he sure they have thought it through, or is this going to unravel too? What happens if a pensioner earns over £35,000 a year through non-taxable income? Are they going to have to register for self-assessment and start filling out a tax return in their 80s or 90s? But if not, why should someone earning taxed income be disadvantaged? Is it fair that a millionaire pensioner and their spouse might receive a payment but two people earning £36,000 won't? And what happens if someone dies in the period between receiving the payment and having to pay it back? Are they going to go after the deceased person's relatives? And two final questions, Madam Deputy Speaker. After all this, the savings for the Treasury this coming year may be as little as £50 million. Does he think it's worth it? And will he apologise? Minister Bell rose to respond. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll deal directly with two of the questions raised because I think it is important to provide reassurance. The Honourable Lady, the Right Honourable Lady, asks about what happens with an estate of someone that is deceased, and I want to be really clear that no, HMRC will never pursue any estate for the winter fuel payment alone. She also asks about the levels of savings. As I set out in my statement, the savings will be £450 million a year within England and Wales, and that is very clear and that is a significant saving. But more broadly, the Honourable Lady talks about apology. She comes here as the party of Liz Truss and lectures anybody else about apology. She comes here as the party of flatlining wages, rising debt, 200,000 increase in pension of poverty, and asks anybody else to apologize. I've never heard such nonsense. And then for all the sound of fury, she was on her most furious today, but we've listened to pensioners. We've also listened to her just now, and I still can't tell what their policy is. It's 11 months on from all the rhetoric and the shouting. It sounds like she might support the means testing of winter fuel after all. That was the policy of her leader before. Her leader also supported means testing the entire state pension in one of her bolder moments. The honourable members opposite say that this isn't much comfort to pensioners, but Age UK say the exact opposite. Charity director Karen Abrahams has said, this announcement is the right thing to do. Martin Lewis has set out it is a big improvement. The now we think, well, there's a lot of chuntering from the benches opposite, maybe the back benches can work out what the front bench policy is by the time they get to their feet in a few minutes' time. I have no idea what the Conservative Party's policy is whatsoever. More widely when it comes to pensioners, this government's priorities are to raise the state pension and to rescue the NHS. The triple lock will see the state pension spending rise by £31 billion a year annually over this parliament. £26 billion is being invested into the NHS because we inherited in England a situation where more than 1 in 5 pensioners aged over 75 were on waiting lists. There is no excuse for that legacy of the party opposite. And neither of these progresses, raising the state pension or investing in the NHS, would be possible without the difficult decisions we have had to make on tax, difficult decisions every party opposite has opposed. It is only this government that can provide that crucial support for pensioners because we will do what is necessary to turn that support from rhetoric into reality. Before leaving, we request everyone to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any future videos. Also, feel free to comment down your thoughts. Her words landed with force, a ripple of applause spreading throughout the chamber, fueled by shared frustration and a collective sense of disillusionment. The shadow secretary's gaze swept over the room, her voice now firm and unyielding. Let's not mince words here, she declared. The government made a conscious decision to slash the winter fuel payment. It is simply indefensible to claim that the economic situation has somehow improved since that decision was made. If anything, all indicators point in the opposite direction. When the cuts were announced, inflation hovered at the target rate of 2%. Today, it stands a full 1.5 points higher. Unemployment figures have climbed, with an additional 150,000 people out of work. The Office for Budget Responsibility has halved its growth forecasts, signalling a grim economic outlook. Meanwhile, this government has continued to run up the national credit card, borrowing has soared, and debt is rising. What kind of chancellor, I ask, is trying to convince anyone that they suddenly have the financial room to reverse these cuts when just months ago they insisted they did not? Her voice dipped into a tone of incredulity as she pressed her point home. Last winter, the government chose to redirect pensioners' fuel money to the unions, a move as unpopular as it was unfair. Now, faced with mounting criticism, they feign a change of heart as if the circumstances have miraculously shifted. But who are they trying to fool? According to their own figures, 50,000 pensioners have been plunged into poverty this year, a direct result of their policies. Over 100,000 additional pensioners have had to seek emergency care during the winter months. Their failure has caused real suffering, and what is most disgraceful is their refusal to accept responsibility for it. She paused briefly, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. This government's approach to reform has been marked by a striking lack of consultation, a reckless disregard for proper impact assessments, and a self-righteous insistence that their actions are beyond scrutiny. There has been no thought given to the people affected or the anxiety wrought by their governance through press releases and sudden announcements. This is the consequence of a government that arrived in office with no coherent plan, no guiding principles, and no clear vision for what it hopes to achieve or how. They flounder from one misstep to another, breaking promises and sowing confusion. Do they really believe that policy is something you can try on like a new mattress? Unwrap it, test it for a night, and if it causes discomfort, simply send it back? This last-minute reversal only raises more questions than it answers. Her tone sharpened as she outlined those questions, laying bare the uncertainty behind the government's sudden change of course. When the Prime Minister announced this U-turn in the Commons, it was clear he had neither a plan nor a funding mechanism to back it up. It was an unfunded promise, plain and simple. Where, I ask, is the £1.25 billion necessary to finance this reversal going to come from? The Minister's response today was to defer that question to the upcoming budget, effectively kicking the can down the road. They claim this decision will not add permanently to borrowing, so does that mean taxes will be raised instead? If so, which taxes? And what about the design of this means testing system? Is this really the best framework they could devise? Have they considered all the consequences, or is this too another policy destined to unravel? She continued with a pointed example, underscoring the potential absurdities the plan might produce. What happens if a pensioner earns more than £35,000 through non-taxable income? Will they be required to register for self-assessment and complete tax returns well into their 80s or 90s? But if not, why should someone with taxed income be disadvantaged? Is it fair that millionaire pensioners might still receive a payment while two modest-earning pensioners making just over the threshold will not? And what if a recipient dies after receiving the payment but before repaying it? Will the government pursue their relatives for repayment? These are not trivial details, they are real concerns affecting real people. Her final question struck directly at the heart of the matter. After all this, the Treasury's projected savings from this change might be as little as £50 million in the coming year. Is it really worth the political cost? And most importantly, will the government finally apologise for the harm their original decision caused? With a subtle nod to the Deputy Speaker, she concluded, leaving the chamber buzzing with the echoes of her words. Minister Bell then rose to offer the government's response. His tone was measured, attempting to convey calm authority as he addressed some of the pressing questions raised. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to address 2 points directly as I believe it is important to provide clarity and reassurance. Firstly, regarding the estates of deceased individuals, I want to be absolutely clear that HM Revenue and Customs will never pursue any estate solely for the winter fuel payment. There is no intention to cause distress or hardship to the families of those who have passed away. He paused briefly before moving to the question of savings, a point of considerable debate. As I outlined in my statement, the anticipated savings from this policy will amount to £450 million annually within England and Wales. This is a substantial sum, and it will contribute meaningfully to the government's fiscal responsibilities. He emphasised the significance of this figure, seeking to portray it as a sensible and necessary measure. Turning to the topic of apologies, Minister Bell's tone grew sharper, almost confrontational. The Honourable Lady comes here representing the party of Liz Truss and lectures others on the subject of apologies. This is a party that presided over stagnant wages, ballooning national debt, and a 200,000 rise in pensioner poverty. For her to suggest that anyone else owes an apology is simply astonishing. I've never heard such nonsense in this chamber. His words drew a smattering of laughter and murmurs from the government benches. He then shifted to the broader context of the government's priorities. Despite all the sound and fury, we have listened to pensioners. We have listened to the concerns raised today. However, even after 11 months of opposition rhetoric and shouting, I'm still unclear on what their actual policy is. It appears that perhaps they now support means testing the winter fuel payment after all, a policy previously championed by their own leader. Indeed, their leader once boldly proposed means testing the entire state pension. Minister Bell sought to contrast the government's position with the opposition's, invoking respected voices from outside Parliament. Age UK has stated that this announcement is the right thing to do, and charity director Karen Abrahams has welcomed the move. Martin Lewis, a prominent financial commentator, has described it as a big improvement. His attempt to lend external credibility was aimed at undermining the opposition's criticism. It cut to the core of what many viewed as a government's duty to its most vulnerable citizens, especially those who had spent their lives contributing to the country. Pensioners, often living on fixed incomes, face the brutal reality of rising energy costs during cold months, making the winter fuel payment a vital lifeline. To many, the initial decision to cut this support felt like a betrayal, a cold calculation that discounted the hardships faced by the elderly. The Conservative government's stance had been steadfast for months, insisting that the cuts were necessary and justified in the broader context of fiscal responsibility. Yet, public sentiment was shifting. Media stories began to highlight heartbreaking cases, pensioners forced to choose between heating their homes or buying food, emergency room visits spiking due to cold-related illnesses, and rising poverty statistics among the elderly. These stories chipped away at the government's argument and increased pressure from opposition parties and advocacy groups alike. The Shadow Secretary's speech embodied this rising tide of discontent. Her articulation of the government's missteps was not only an indictment of policy but a critique of leadership and political will. She underscored that the government's decisions were not made with empathy or proper scrutiny but were instead reactive measures made without a plan or the humility to admit error. Her invocation of the metaphor comparing policy experiments to trying out a new mattress was a particularly vivid image, a symbol of political recklessness, suggesting that lives and livelihoods were being treated as disposable or experimental variables. The government's reversal, while welcome, raised doubts. If policy could be adopted and then so hastily abandoned, what guarantee was there that future reversals wouldn't add to the uncertainty and anxiety already felt by pensioners? The complexity of the means testing system itself emerged as a significant concern. Means testing, in principle, is meant to target support to those who need it most. However, in practice, it can introduce bureaucratic hurdles, unintended inequalities, and administrative costs that diminish its effectiveness. The fears articulated about pensioners needing to navigate self-assessment tax returns in their late years or the possibility of millions missing out because of technicalities added a human dimension to what could have otherwise been a dry fiscal debate. The Shadow Secretary also challenged the government's fiscal narrative, highlighting the discrepancy between the government's claim of an improved economy and the realities reflected in inflation, unemployment, and growth forecasts. These economic indicators are the backdrop against which welfare policies must be judged, yet the government's contradictory position undermined their credibility. They argued the cuts were necessary because of economic constraints, but the subsequent increase in borrowing and debt, along with rising unemployment, told a more complicated story. Minister Bell's response sought to reclaim the narrative by pointing to the government's broader achievements and intentions. He emphasized the significant investment in pensions and the National Health Service as evidence of commitment to public welfare. The tripling of the state pension through the triple lock mechanism and the injection of billions into the NHS were presented as proof that difficult choices were being made for the greater good. By referencing respected figures like Karen Abrahams and Martin Lewis, he aimed to demonstrate that the government's position had external validation. His pointed remark about the opposition party being the party of Liz Truss was designed to associate them with a controversial and turbulent period in conservative politics, thereby undermining their moral authority to lecture the government on issues of apology and responsibility. It was a classic political maneuver, seeking to shift focus from the substance of criticism to the credibility of the critic. Still, the question lingered: was the reversal truly a victory for pensioners, or merely damage control in the face of overwhelming public pressure? The government's promise to recover funds from higher earners raised concerns about fairness and administrative complexity. The skepticism expressed by opposition members was rooted in past experiences where promises of careful implementation gave way to policies riddled with loopholes and unintended consequences. Behind the political rhetoric, the human toll was unmistakable. Families worried about elderly relatives struggling to keep warm. Charities reported increased demand for support services. Health services faced additional pressure from cold-related illnesses, exacerbated by the financial strain on older people. The political theatre unfolding in Westminster was a reflection of real-life hardship across the country. As the discussion wound down, it became clear that the debate was about more than a single policy change. It touched on fundamental questions about governance, accountability, and the social contract between the state and its citizens. What kind of government should the country have? One that listens and adapts, or one that stubbornly sticks to flawed policies at the expense of the vulnerable? The Shadow Secretary's appeal for an apology was not just symbolic, it was a call for humility and recognition of mistakes, qualities that many felt had been lacking. Minister Bell's defense underscored the government's confidence in its broader agenda but also revealed the fragile balance policymakers must maintain between fiscal prudence and social welfare. The invitation at the end, encouraging viewers to subscribe and share their opinions, was a reminder that democracy does not end with parliamentary debate. It continues in the voices of citizens, in public discourse, and in the pressure that voters can exert on their representatives. This issue, like so many before it, would likely remain a topic of contention and dialogue as the government moved forward. Ultimately, the winter fuel payment controversy highlighted the challenges faced by modern governments navigating economic constraints while attempting to uphold social protections. It served as a case study in the complexities of policymaking, the perils of political posturing, and the enduring importance of empathy in leadership. The fate of tens of thousands of pensioners depended not only on numbers on a ledger but on decisions made by people accountable to the public, decisions that would shape lives and legacies. In the days that followed, regional papers began publishing MPs' voting records, highlighting who had supported the original cuts and who had spoken out against them. Some MPs attempted to distance themselves, others doubled down, but all were now aware that this issue would not simply blow over. Constituents were angry, and with a general election on the horizon, many politicians were quietly reassessing their party's message to older voters. At community events, older citizens began speaking out with renewed confidence. "We're not a burden," said one woman at a town hall meeting in Lincolnshire. "We paid into this country our whole lives. We're not asking for handouts, we're asking for fairness." Her sentiment was echoed by many others, tired of being portrayed as expendable in economic models.